All righty, it is 10 a.m., 9 a.m. there for Rhoda out in Rapid City. So we are going to go ahead and get started. This is our first time to do a specialty crop week. So we are very excited to have all of you participating. So with that, I am going to leave it to Rhoda Burrows and excited to hear about your talk on grapes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rhoda Burrows. I'm a horticulture extension specialist and professor with the Department of Agronomy, Horticulture, and Plant Science at SDSU. And some of you may have seen me before. I've been with Extension for 23 years now. And I work mostly with fruit and vegetable production. And so today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is grapes. And we'll do sort of an overview of what's going on in South Dakota. Let's all this up here. There we go. So grape growing in South Dakota. And sometimes people ask me, you can grow grapes in South Dakota? Well, we do have wild grapes here, but we also have the availability of some cold hardy grape hybrids that we can use. So we actually have at least 75 commercial vineyards in South Dakota for a total of 167 acres. And if you do the math, that's a little over 2 acres a piece on average. We have vineyards that may be a quarter of an acre. We have some that are close to around 20 acres, just a couple of those. And they support over 35 wineries in the state. Not all the wine that is produced in the state comes from South Dakota grapes because we just don't have that kind of acreage. But these figures are according to the 2022 Census of Agriculture. So I get people calling me sometimes to ask, I want to grow some grapes. It seems like a fun thing to do. And this may be on the spectrum from homeowner to somebody who actually hopes to make some money from planting grapes. And for those, for the latter people, one of the first things that we go through with them is, do you have a potential buyer for your grapes? Now, if you have pretty good quality grapes, you're likely to be able to find a South Dakota winery that will buy them, but you want to make sure that you're going to get the price that you need to before you even plant. And the other thing that you need to check with them is, what varieties are they wanting? If you plant all Frontenac and they say, I really don't want Frontenac, you're stuck. The grape takes 3 to 4 years to come into bearing, so you have to be planning quite a ways out. Or maybe you're thinking of starting a winery, and that's a whole nother subject in itself, with a whole range of funding and legal aspects as well. So we won't be touching on that today, but I've noticed that a number of our vineyard owners end up starting a winery. And I think some of that is the value added is probably where the money is rather than growing the grapes themselves. But the other thing that you need to consider is, do you have a labor source? Pruning can be a lot of work. A vineyard isn't just planting it, walking away, and coming back and harvesting the grapes in the fall. There's constant work through the starting with pruning and in the late winter all the way through harvest, and then any post-harvest treatments that you may need to do. But particularly labor source at harvest, because you got to get those grapes off in a hurry. You want them at the exact stage of ripeness that the winery specifies. So uh, you'll need to have a labor source at that point. And people do all kinds of things, ranging from high school kids to uh, how to write colonies, um, friends, family, a whole range of aspects uh, to to get that labor source. But that's something you want to be thinking about, especially if you're in an isolated area. And then can you wait 6 or more years, 6 to 10 years generally, to pay back your initial investment for the plants, for the trellis, all of that is a considerable investment uh, before you start getting those grapes back and start being able to pay back into that. So if you're wanting to plant grapes to make a lot of money, you're probably better investing in the stock market. But if you want to plant grapes because that just seems like an enjoyable thing to do, uh, I usually recommend people start with a 1/4 acre, see how that goes, and then expand if things go well. What cultivars should I grow or can I grow? Uh, I already mentioned you want to be talking about your potential buyer about that before you plant. But if you're just growing them for yourselves, uh, one of the things you want to do is start by narrowing your choices to ones that are cold hardy for our area. And I still recommend staying with zone 4 at least for most of the state. Maybe down the southeast, you can get into some zone 5 if you've got a good site, and a lot of this will depend upon the site as well. Um, but the other thing to remember is there are some varieties that can be perfectly tolerant of minus 30 degrees during the middle of the winter, but they're not adapted to our sudden drops in the fall or ups and downs in the spring. Uh, so that's why you'll see certain cultivars that I recommend and certain ones that may not do as well for us. Uh, and elevations above Rapid City and probably the northern tier of the state too may need to look at shorter season varieties because you don't want those grapes to freeze before you're able to harvest them. So some of the cold hardy hybrids that are good varieties for us, and this is not all inclusive, but it's good ones to start with. Um, 4 of these are from Minnesota breeding program. Frontenac, Marquette, Itasca, and La Crescent are all from Minnesota. Frontenac and La Crescent are the older ones. Frontenac now has 3 different kinds of Frontenac. The one you see there, and then a more grayer or more whiter variety. Marquette was developed a few years after Frontenac, and it was selected to have less acidity because most of our northern hybrids have pretty high acidity, and so the winemakers have to struggle with that. In contrast, grapes that are grown in California, for example, don't have enough acidity, so sometimes we combine the grapes from the 2 areas. Brianna and Petite Pearl are both from a private breeding program, and these are well, Petite Pearl is one of the newer varieties, and its hardiness is not well established in South Dakota yet. Some people have had a little bit of problem with it, but others are liking it quite well. Brianna's been around a while. Brianna's kind of my favorite. Uh, it's very good fresh eating if you don't mind seeds. It has kind of a pineapple taste to it. And I kind of like the wine too. So it's we kind of think of Brianna as a wild child because it tends to shoot out canes whatever direction it wants. Um, and that's probably why I like it. uh, Vineyard owners who have to deal with it may feel a little differently, but Somerset seedless is one, the one seedless variety at this point that I would recommend for South Dakota. As you can see, the clusters are very small, the grapes are very small, but it's very tasty. If you take a grape from this, it's probably got 3 times the flavor that's in one of those grapes that you buy, seedless grapes at the store, who are just sort of expanded balls of mush. But the Somerset seedless has more of that perhaps wild taste to it, so that it's more flavorful. So, and it's pretty darn hardy. People are growing it up near Aberdeen, and it's been consistently hardy for them. And then our own special child at SDSU, Valiant, which was bred by Ron Peterson, our very own breeder at SDSU. And Valiant is about half wild grape and half other kinds of grapes. So it retains some of the wild characteristics, which means that it might not be the best wine grape, although people do make decent wine out of it. But where it really shines is in juice and jams and jellies. And I strongly recommend it over Concord for us in South Dakota. For one thing, it ripens in August. So it's a good one for shorter season. Anytime you shorten the season, you're less likely for it to get frosted or even hailed on. So Valiant is one I often recommend for homeowners and for those in shorter seasons. So where should I plant grapes? Well, first of all, particularly with homeowners, we need to think about full sun. A slope is best for vineyards because the cold air can drain away from your vineyard. And it also helps increase airflow for resisting diseases. Low and for medium fertility soil. This is not a crop you want to put in your most fertile soil. You don't want to put it in an old cow lot, for example. You want to avoid those high nitrogen levels. And you want to be out of the way of herbicides, especially 2,4-D and dicamba drift. If you've had tomatoes or potatoes in your vegetable garden, for example, and you keep getting herbicide damage on them, you do not want to plant grapes. Grapes and tomatoes are sort of our canaries for herbicide damage. They're going to be the first ones to show the damage. And over time, it can take out a vineyard. This is an example of what 2,4-D damage can look like on the left. And that's actually relatively mild damage. I've seen it much, much worse. This was on the newest growth. So probably the vine's going to recover from this without too much problem. But if this happens year after year after year, it can weaken the vine. And on the right, we see what dicamba can do with a drift exposure. And 2,4-D can drift for miles. We have had a research vineyard on near campus in Brookings, and it was a couple hundred yards from the road, and there was a windbreak in between, and we still got very bad drift damage on that from the roadside applicators. So soil, I mentioned low to medium fertility. I prefer under 4% organic matter. If you start getting into 6%, 8%, it's really hard to control the amount of nitrogen that the plant is taking up. If you get too much nitrogen on grapes, two things can happen. One, your fruit quality can become poorer, and part of that is from shading, because nitrogen feeds a lot of leaf growth, and that will shade the fruit. And the other thing is, along with that leaf growth, it's not hardening off in the fall as well. And if you don't have sunshine on your canes, they may not harden off as well. So you get more winter damage. So we look for the lower fertility soils. We also look for good drainage on a soil. I recommend that people go out and dig a hole, maybe 18, 24 inches deep, fill it with water. If it doesn't drain within 24 hours, you probably don't have a good soil for grapevines. And the pH, grapes can tolerate a fairly wide range. We do have some vineyards at 7.4 pH soils. Some of them do have to apply micronutrients like zinc or iron on a yearly basis to make up for the fact that the high pH is restricting uptake of those minor elements. I want to go into this frost selection, point, because grapes are very sensitive to frost. And so one of the things that when we're looking for a site, we want to be careful of. I once had somebody call up and say, I want to plant a vineyard, and I've got this great bottom valley soil. It's very rich, and two things wrong with that. One, it's the bottom of the valley, and two, it's very rich soil. And so I thought this diagram illustrated the frost flow very well. You'll notice on the right, the air is able to drain down underneath the vines, and so it's going to pool down in this bottom spot, and the vines are actually up above it. On the left, however, we've got some sort of windbreak that has vegetation at the bottom, and that's blocking that cold air, and so that gets blocked and starts to pool, and so you're getting frost damage further up. So I want to make sure that the air is unobstructed in its path down the slope. One thing to watch with that is, are your planting rows itself, the grapevines itself, blocking the cold air and pulling it? So one way to avoid that is to lay out your planting rows parallel to the prevailing direction of the cold air drift, or perpendicular to the slope is a better way to say that, probably, so that the cold air doesn't have anything that's stopping it. If you do have some windbreaks at the lower point of your vineyard, one of the things you might do is want to, if they're trees rather than shrubs, to prune out those lower branches, and so the cold air can drift down around the trunks. And then, of course, look at your vineyard. Are there natural swales, or are there air drainage paths that you want to keep open, make sure that they're not filled with shrubs or other things over time. One other trick to helping avoid spring frost, which is a big problem for a lot of vineyards, and one of the things you may want to look at is a variety that buds out a little bit later. And grapes are usually fairly slow to bud out, but and that's looking at pruning practices. And this is a way to use apical dominance to keep those lower buds dormant. So if you prune and leave more cane than you're intending to eventually, uh, these buds at the end of the cane will start to break first. And when they break bud, they tend to delay emergence of those lower buds. And so we use that to our advantage. It means you have to go back and prune twice. But once the damage of frost is passed, then you go ahead and cut off to where you originally wanted to cut. And those buds will go ahead and develop, and hopefully after frost. I wanted just to talk about winter damage a little bit because it is a continuing problem, even in with our warming climate. We still can see winter damage. We can get one of those northern clippers that just comes in and drops the temperature 40 degrees or more. And we tend to see winter damage if we have an early frost in the fall, and the leaves drop off before they've had a chance to fully furnish the sugars back down to the roots and to the stems, and so that they have less sugar, uh, and so they're more susceptible to cold damage. One thing that is a saving grace for grapevines is they have 3 buds within each bud. The first, or the biggest, most developed, is usually fruitful, usually has fruit buds that were developed fairly early in the season, during the growing season. And then there's a secondary bud. So if something happens to this most developed bud, it's going to be the most susceptible to cold. If something happens to it, the secondary bud will go ahead and develop. And usually it will have fewer clusters than the primary bud, but you still will usually get some fruit if it doesn't get damaged as well. And then finally, there's sort of the insurance to keep the vine growing, and that is just foliage buds, not fruitful. But the vine can keep growing and recuperate unless you have the same thing happen next year. Another issue with grapevines is phylloxera. And this, you may have heard, phylloxera was what shut down the grape industry in France for it was wiping grapevines out right and left until they finally, after years and years, figured out that American grapevines had resistance to this little insect. It's a little insect that forms these galls on the leaves. It also will form galls on roots, and particularly on vinifera's, the European grapevines. When it formed the galls on the roots, it just weakened the vine totally, and would wipe out the vine. Well, our varieties were resistant to it, so it'll still have the foliar phase where it's making these galls on the leaves, but it's not affecting the roots. So our grapevines basically saved the European wine industry. And even though our hybrids are half vinifera in some cases, or even a little bit more, we're still retaining, for the most part, that characteristic. One thing I should mention is with our northern grapevines. Pretty much we do not graft them, that they're on their own root, which is a little different than is the case with some of the warmer season varieties. And it also makes it much better for coming back from a cold damage. And oh, by the way, if you're growing grapes, one of the things that you'll need is bird netting. And we've had people try to grow grapes without it, and those birds are hungry and they're not stupid. I want to talk a little bit now more about the grapevine itself. So here we have a grapevine with a trunk, a cordon, which is a cane that's 2 or more years old, so it's woody growth, and then the cane, which is a 1-year-old growth. Now the fruit is produced only on the cane and is only on a 1-year-old cane. Once this goes to 2 years, it doesn't produce fruit. So the whole strategy of growing grapes is to keep pruning back those canes so that they're producing new shoots, which will produce the fruit. So you prune off a lot of material every year, and we'll show some examples of that in a minute. One of the other things to keep in mind as we're talking about how to shape the vine is that you want to maximize sun exposure onto the new growth. It does a couple things. It drastically reduces diseases. It helps the vine harden off in the fall. It helps produce good quality fruit and helps decrease diseases as well. So our objective is basically to create curtains. Now you could have that over an arbor or other structure as well, but think thin, think not a big, like a big shrub, but a very narrow curtain. And I just threw this in to explain a little bit about how much sunlight is blocked, how much the energy is blocked when you have just a single leaf layer. The green here is representing a leaf. And once you have just one layer as opposed to the sun shining directly on it, you go from 15% of your buds not forming to 39%. If you got 2 layers of leaf, you're getting almost up to 50% fewer buds that will form on that shoot. And the fruitfulness likewise drops from about half the buds having fruit buds versus just 11% with 1 layer of leaf shading that cane. So that gives you a really good idea of why we're talking curtains. We want to decrease the amount of leaves. We want to have them arranged so that they get as much sun as they possibly can without shading the canes. So these are a number of different kinds of training systems that people use to try to maximize the sun. And there's all kinds of variations of this, but this gives you kind of an idea. The high cordon or VSP are probably our most common ones in South Dakota, although I've seen quite a few of the 4-cane Niffen up here in the upper left as well. And so we'll go into this a little bit more. These are renewed each year, so this is a 1-year-old cane. Just 4 canes left on the vine when you get done pruning. Whereas cordon here, this is multiple year wood with the shoots coming off. And similarly with the VSP. Just to note, grapevines need a lot of support, and uh, they have to be able to support vines with a full canopy on a rainy, windy days. There's a lot of weight there. So 9-gauge wire is recommended and very strong end post construction. More than one vineyard has come down and found their end post failed, and it just went down like dominoes down the row. So I'm going to switch now and talk a little bit about the process of growing. At planting, we don't usually recommend amending the planting hole with compost. Just like with woody trees, we don't recommend that anymore because it gets to be too much of a barrier, and roots don't want to go out and explore the soil more if you do that. You want to plant so the topmost roots are at or slightly below ground level, just similar to that of planting a tree. And then you have the option, some people leave any branches on the first year and then cut it back. A lot of people will leave 2 or 3, even 1 or 2 strong buds and cut everything else off at the time of planting. And you want to then pay particular attention that first year. Grapevines are fairly dry hardy, but not when they're little babies. During the first growing season, you'll need some sort of support. It can be a bamboo wood stake, even a string coming down from the trellis above it. Some people use grow tubes, particularly if you've got a lot of rabbits or deer around. And if you have deer, you're going to need to put up a fence anyway. It can even help protect against hail. But the flip side of that is you need to take them off by mid-August so that plants can harden off. Otherwise, they're sort of living in that nice greenhouse and they don't realize that winter is coming. So at the end of the first winter, we come back and look at our vines. If you've had really good, strong growth that first year, you may have a cane that's tall enough to become the trunk, the main trunk, up to the wire, wherever you desire it. If you do that, you want to remove all buds from it, except where you want to develop either fruiting canes or cordons, those arms that go out. If it didn't reach desired height, you cut it back down to 2 buds again. And that may seem drastic. And remember, these are not trees. So you're cutting it way down. You've developed your root system in that first year, and that's actually the most important part of it. It's not the cane development, but the root development. So that first year, sometimes I've seen canes that, shot up all the way to the top of the trellis, and then winter comes and they die totally back because they were too busy growing and not busy enough hardening off. So it's very, very common for the vines that first year growth to die back nearly to the ground. Sometimes even a bud will have to come from below ground. So if that happens, don't feel too discouraged. It's very common. Once you have that vine up to the trellis where you want it, you take off all the buds and shoots from along the trunk line. Yeah, I think we've got a second shoot going on here. Once the trunk has reached 4 to 6 inches or a note or 2 above the desired height, then cut the tip back, and that will encourage that side branching. Second growing season, you do not want to allow any fruit to form. The vine doesn't need to be doing that. It needs to be growing structure. And so cut off any fruit during the second year. And you're going to first and second growing season, you need to control the weeds. Landscape fabric is used quite a bit. You want to make sure that it's the edges are covered so that a mower doesn't catch it if you're using a mower. Organic mulch is a possibility, and of course, continue watering. I want to talk a little bit now about pruning. Grapes should be pruned every year. Homeowners sometimes have a hard time doing that, but if you think about what I was talking about with the pruning, you'll realize you really do need to prune it every year. Mid to late spring, and in fact, this is one, prune all your other trees and so forth first, and then do your grapevines just before they start to swell. Late pruning can help delay bud break, which is a good thing. The vines may bleed when you cut them. Don't worry about that. It's fine. It's natural, and it doesn't even harm the plant. So don't worry about that. If possible, I recommend pruning during dry weather, particularly in some of our older vineyards. We're starting to see some trunk diseases come in, and pruning during dry weather will help somewhat to avoid that. Now, how much do you cut off? Up to 90%. So that's a lot. You're not going to do that to a tree. This is why I say we're not talking trees here, we're talking vines. So each bud produces a leafy shoot with 2 to 3 fruit clusters. If you have too much fruit, you're stressing the plant and you'll tend to get poor quality fruit. If a plant is struggling, therefore you need to cut it back more. Decrease that fruit load and balance the top with the root system. So if you've got a big healthy vine, we're saying keep 40 to 60 buds per plant. No more than that. And if you start counting, you'll be surprised at how long that can add, how quickly that can add up. Just talking a little bit about where you cut when you cut. Here's the bud. This was cut a little too close to the bud. We want to leave a little stub, which is a little different than we talk about with trees, but with the canes, the 1-year-old growth, we own a little bit of space there. And again, on the left here, we have some that were cut a little too close to the bud. This may dry out and the bud may dry out then, whereas this gives it a little bit more protection from drying out and to some degree from diseases. Back to our training systems again, just to give you a review of that. One of the things you might notice with these cane systems that where we're just leaving 1-year-old shoots, a limited number of 1-year-old shoots every year. We also leave a little 2-bud cane at each spot because those 2 buds then are going to grow out, produce a shoot for next year. So we're doing the canes and the little shoots with that type of system. We're doing kind of the same thing with the cordon, although we're leaving longer canes, and then those are the renewal shoots, those short little shoots there. So if you have a vineyard that looks like this, where do you even start? And you'll notice one thing on this picture is that we have 2 trunks on a lot of these vines, and that's very commonly done. It can help winter hardiness too a little bit, but you also have a backup in case you have a badly damaged cane for some reason, a badly damaged trunk. The other trunk can sort of take over. So So that's often done with winter, in cold winter areas. This is an example of, again, that cane that we're leaving, and we see here that short little stub that's going to produce the cane for next year. And these are going to be our fruiting canes. Each one of these buds is going to produce a shoot with 1 to 2 or even 3 clusters of fruit on it. So if you imagine next summer, this is going to be very crowded. We may need to remove some shoots during the summer. The cordon, on the other hand, this is what it looks like in an actual vineyard after pruning. And again, each one of these buds along here is going to produce a shoot. So a lot of foliage there. This is an example of a vine before pruning and after pruning. I'm going to talk just very quickly about vineyard floor management. In drier areas, you may keep it tilled. That's not my favorite way. It's done some, but you can get more erosion. Takes more labor probably to keep it tilled. If you're in a drier climate, that may work better because you have less weed pressure. Probably most of our vineyards in South Dakota use sod between the rows. And I want to point out this lower left vineyard here. That's what I was talking about, allowing cold air to drain down the row instead of it being caught by the vine. Here we see quite a bit of weed pressure underneath, so they probably need to come in and do something about this. It may be a spray, it may be cutting it back even. There's a weed badger, which just lightly disturbs the top inch of the soil or so, that people sometimes use. And of course, reasons for controlling weeds is to conserve the soil moisture, reduce cover for mice and other rodents that may get in there, and to decrease disease. And it just plain looks better. But some people will use Roundup around the bumps of the vine. Be really, really careful with that. Even if you're doing it against woody, you still can have some uptick, and usually there's some lower shoots that are trying to come up from the base. And if any of those gets hit, that goes through the vine. And so those of us in extension see these photos every once in a while, and it just makes our heart sink when we see these. So you want to be real careful about that. Some people, especially with young vines, if you have the plastic tubes around the vine, then you can go in and spray between with a little bit more assurance that you're not hitting the vine. Be careful though that there's not any shoots that are trying to come up outside the tube. Grasses are usually used for between rows, and you're looking for ones that are going to, of course, withstand traffic, not be too competitive. A bunch grass may be a better choice than a fescue or something that's going to creep into the row itself. If it goes dormant during a drought, that's even better because it's not taking water away from the vines. Some of our vineyards have native grasses, blue grama and buffalo grass on the western side of the state. And for more information, you can go to our website, extension.org, sdstate.edu, and you can type in grapes if you want, and search on that, and a number of articles will come up. I've recently updated the grape production resources page, so if you want, you can type that in, and that will give you links to many other articles, both on our website and some of those on other websites that are particularly good for northern grapes. And with that, I will give you my contact information here. You're welcome to give me a call or to email me. I'm in and out of my office a lot, so a cell phone may be the best way, or you can text me on that number, or emails probably the best, because if I can't take care of it right away, I can put a reminder on it to come back to it. So any of those options are available for you. And with that, doesn't look like we have any questions. Any recommended sources for purchase of new vines? There's several in Minnesota. One of the things I would start looking for is there's certified vines that have gone through a process of cleaning up so that they're not carrying some of the common diseases. And so that you might want to look for certified vines. I think most people either get out of New York or one of the Minnesota nurseries. But if you're having trouble locating a specific vine, let me know. With the newer varieties, you do have to get on a waiting list pretty quick, because they do get bought up pretty quickly. Is there a list of places? I don't have one on our website, and I can check and see if there's one put out by one of my colleagues. There was kind of a burst with the Northern Hybrids release just starting about 20 years ago, and Extension put a lot of time and energy into Northern grapes growing. Cornell had a Northern Grapes project, which has a lot of good information on it. And I've noticed in the last 5 years or so, that's dropped way off. So a lot of those information sites are not current anymore. But if you have trouble, let me know. Best time for planting, you want to make sure it's after the last frost date, because these grapes are unless you're planting dormant vines. And then you can probably plant anytime. I'd probably wait till May anyway, till the soil's a little bit warmed up.
Okay, and Rhoda, over in the question and answer, you were asked, have Japanese beetles become more of an issue with grapes, and how do you control them?
They're starting to move in, particularly in the southeast part of the state. We'll see them. And I am not up on the latest insecticides for those. But if you contact me, I can get you an answer.
Okay, while everyone is maybe thinking of any final questions, I'm going to go ahead and share the CEA credit sheet. That way anyone who needs that can get that QR code scanned. But feel free to keep asking questions while I'm getting all of that done.
I encourage people to plant a vine or two in their backyard. You can do all kinds of things with them as far as landscaping and get to know them and have some fruit while you're at it. I should mention that if you have wild grapes, they are male plants and female plants, whereas all our hybrids except one, St. Pepin, have both male and female blossoms on the same plant, so we don't have to worry about that.
Okay, well, if we don't have any others, there's a poll that's going to be shared. Please take a few seconds to answer that. And thank you for attending. We will be talking about diseases on cucurbits and at the plant diagnostic clinic tomorrow. And on Thursday, Christine will be talking about some management for specialty crops. So please join us. Thank you, Rhoda, for
everyone.
talking.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great day.
All right, I think we are good. Thank you, everyone.